Welcome to Jerusalem Unplugged, the only podcast dedicated to Jerusalem, its history, and its people. Your host, Roberto Mazza, will bring you guests discussing their relationship with the Holy City. A journey through history, society, feelings, and hopes for the future. Follow the podcast on all social media platforms at Jerusalem Unplugged.
Welcome to Jerusalem Unplugged. I'm your host, Roberto Mazza, and today my guest is Toine van Teeffelen. Toine is the author of The Birthplace of Jesus Is in Palestine, a memoir, published in 2024. The Birthplace of Jesus Is in Palestine is essentially a narrative of a Christian family in Bethlehem in the West Bank. The book is based on diary entries and interviews between the year 2000 to 2023, so almost 2 decades, in fact, a quarter of a century. And the Dutch author, Toine, is an anthropologist and a peace activist. And he chronicles the spontaneous reactions of his Palestinian children and wife, navigating the challenges posed by curfews and checkpoints. Problems of Palestinian schools' life are shown from the perspective of teachers and students. So, against the background of Israeli occupation and settlement building, the intricacies of Palestinian culture and its daily rhythms and domestic spaces all come to life. Throughout the pages, and also throughout our interview, the key Palestinian concept of sumud, or steadfastness, is explored and discussed. The memoir details acts of creative nonviolent resistance, individual protest, affirmation of cultural identity, and inspiring examples of Muslim-Christian community. The book, the memoir, also reveals unexpected connections between Palestinian culture in Bethlehem and the broader Christian values and traditions. And then at the end, we will reflect upon the implications of the current war in Gaza. But before we delve into all of this, first things first, Toine, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Now, let's start with a basic question. Can you briefly tell us something about yourself and about the origins of the book?
Yeah, well, I'm from Holland, from Rotterdam and Amsterdam, and I have been involved in the 1980s in Palestine solidarity work, while at the same time having an entry into the Western peace movement. In my case, it was Pax Christi, International Catholic Movement, and I started to do anthropology. I did my master's in it. I did interviews with Israeli anthropologists, and I did my master's about the establishment of Israeli anthropology. Then I turned later on to a PhD, which was in discourse analysis, and it was about the portrayal of Israel and Palestine in popular literature, in thrillers, in bestsellers like Exodus of Leon Uris in the 1950s. I took books from the Second World War until 1996, and at the end of doing the PhD, I was involved in establishing an academic relation between Amsterdam University, where I did my master's and PhD, and Birzeit University in the West Bank. And so I was sent out for a year to teach discourse analysis, discourse and Palestine in Birzeit. And so that was like a field whereby students and I discussed the issues of metaphors, of stylistic things, even grammar, related to communicating Palestine, both about Palestine and out of coming from Palestine. And so I stayed there for 1 year. I got to know my Palestinian wife from Bethlehem. And so we decided to stay there in 95. We married. And we established ourselves in Bethlehem. After I came from Ramallah, I lived in Bethlehem all the time. So that is basically my personal story. And at the same time, I have always been involved in kind of solidarity work, human rights work, peace work regarding Palestine. So that shaped also my life here. I turned from anthropology towards education, mainly because I was I had a chance to get projects, to develop projects at Palestinian schools and among Palestinian educational organizations. So that's not so much formal education, but among Palestinian youth and Palestinian women, how to communicate Palestine, how to bring yourself into thinking about what is the best way of communication. Visually also, of course, over time, more and more. And meanwhile, my wife and I, we established a family. We got kids here, growing up in Palestine. So that's really drew our life here from the mid-90s on. And so in the second Intifada, which started in 2000, of course, we were busy also at the time. I did a guiding course. I thought about guiding Dutch groups also coming here as a way of getting an income. So that was an important thing. But yes, in 2000, the Intifada started. No tourists, of course, coming in anymore. And in the Intifada, we were in a kind of really critical situation suddenly. And as a way, maybe a little bit theoretical, I started to make notes. That came naturally. And of course, news media in Holland were interested in what happened here. So I started to try to write what we now would call a blog. That was the start of the book, because the book is basically a collection of blogs which were thematically arranged, and also in time they were arranged.
So from the Netherlands to Bethlehem. So you lived in Bethlehem since 1995, as you mentioned, with your Palestinian Christian wife, Mary. How did that initial decision to settle there in Bethlehem shape then your perspective as both an insider, but also as an outsider in and of Palestinian society?
Yeah, I think the combination which went from before I came into Palestine and Bethlehem, this combination of doing solidarity work, which is very much insider related work, you can say, and at the same time academic work, which is more like distance work, more like a kind of objectifying approach. So this combination shaped me, and that shaped, I think, also the tone of the diaries and blogs which I wrote. It's also a bit, I would say, part of my personality, that I have the tendency not to completely immerse, not to completely identify with my environment, but always to keep a little bit like an observer's stand. If you look at anthropology, then also it has this well-known method of participatory observation or participant observation. So being on the same time being part of the society, on the other hand, having an approach of observation. Also here you see this insider-outsider type of dialectic.
That made me think about my relationship with Jerusalem. But I lived on and off in the city. But as an historian of a city, I always felt, like you said, somehow detached. I mean, my professional skills made me feel like I'm interested in a certain part of the city, not necessarily the rest, which also makes me not really a Jerusalemite, but just someone who knows the city. Now, throughout the book, you weave together your personal family experiences with broader socio-political observations. And I was wondering if this narrative, this approach, was intentional from the beginning or something that evolved throughout the book, throughout gathering, as you said, the notes and what you have been writing throughout the various years.
Yeah, I think I combined, on the one hand, making notes, of course, for writing a diary, for blogs. I didn't do it every day, but like you made weekly notes, what happened to you, the stories of daily life. So that was one thing. On the other hand, I regularly made interviews with people, academics, leaders of NGOs, activists, around certain themes. I had an outlet at the time that was just a physical outlet, the Jerusalem Times. So I made interviews about topics like narrative and Palestine, or sumud, which is one of the central concepts in the book, steadfastness, or about the sources of hope, education and Palestine. So that was for me like a way to get little guest lectures from people who were here part of the society, and it was for me an easy way to learn more in depth about certain topics in the society. So I think the book grew out of this combination of blog notes, diary notes on the one hand, and the more maybe theoretical types of interviews, although they also were very concrete about these topics, but they generated these more general kind of observations about which you talk.
And there's a concept that is, I don't want to say omnipresent throughout the book, but it's certainly very central, the concept of sumud, of steadfastness. Could you explain what drew you to this concept and how your understanding of this idea changed over your years in Bethlehem?
Yes, I was interested already at the time that I was in Holland, active in the Dutch Palestine Committee. And at that time, we confronted also the issue how to communicate Palestinian daily life to people in general, because in Holland it's well known that they were traditionally quite pro-Israeli and pro-Zionist. So what we felt was at the time, after the publication of a book by Raja Schade in 1982, it was called The Third Way, and it showed like an approach of Palestinian sumud, which was beyond slogans. It was more about how people enacted in their daily life the concept. And so Schade, he said, sumud is like the third way. It is between, on the one hand, submission to the occupation, on the other hand, getting pulled by, the vicious cycle of blind hate. So he said it is like staying on the land, but not that, it's not passive. It is like being committed in your life to be connected to the land and to your society, and to do that in an active way. Sumud is not like steadfastness as a noun, but it's standing fast, it's a verb. So this, I felt at the time, was an important way how to break through, pre-existing stereotypes, images people have, like in a country like in Holland. So at that time already, I started to work with that concept, being inspired by that book of Raja Schade. But at the same time, I was active in the Dutch peace movement, and in the peace movement, the third way, the name of the title of that book, is also well known to be like a peace movement concept. You don't want the third way is between blind hate and between not being active at all. So it is like the way that you speak about nonviolent peace activities, and this was so. I could easily relate to peace movement experiences by using this concept of sumud. So at the time I wrote a Dutch language book about it. That was and also at the Dutch Palestine Committee we renamed our newsletter into sumud. So that became like a symbol in the movement, and so the will was to go to daily life and to the history of daily life also, instead of speaking about grand concepts of resistance, which can be filled in many different ways and often in a way that it is misunderstood. So that I think was like the way how I started to work with sumud. That started in Holland, but I continue it in Palestine, where I became active in an non-governmental organization, the Arab Educational Institute, which was connected to Pax Christi, and so there too we started to see that as an educational concept relevant for Palestinian students, also to see what is this terrible situation? How do we get meaning in life? Meaning in our life here. And so I felt working with Palestinian youth and later on with Palestinian women that they could identify with this concept in a way that was relevant for their own life. So these are let's say the two origins from the way how the concept pulled me into a certain direction.
I want to talk about something else that comes out of the book. You write, and I'm using these words carefully because this is exactly how I felt when I read the book. You really write beautifully about how children, and you also talk about your daughter, processed the realities of occupation through play and games. So what surprised you most about how children navigate trauma and conflict?
Yeah, I of course, during the curfews of the second Intifada, these were 24-hour curfews, and we were allowed by the army every few days to get out and to quickly run for our shopping list. So that was quite something. The curfews in 2002, when our daughter was 4 or 5 years old. So these were, very limiting for the kids. I speak about our kids, but also the kids of the neighbors along the street. In the first curfew, we had like 3 curfews of 4 or 5 weeks in 2002. In spring, it was the curfew because of the siege of the Church of Nativity by the Israeli army in the church. There a few hundred militants, Palestinians, were kept. They hid themselves there, and they were protected by the different congregations active in the church. So that implied that the whole city was really was really under siege also, and that you had tanks in the streets coming. And in the beginning, it was really difficult for kids even to go into the garden or to put your head out of the windows. And, the kids, maybe that's an element of surprise. I don't know, because, these were our first kids. And so it was remarkable to see our daughter to how much energy there is she wanted to go on the street, but was not allowed. When the ball, let's say, with which we played around the house when that was possible. Then it went maybe out along a hill going down, but then the question was, could you run behind it? Often not. So you were protective for the children, but at the same time you wanted to keep them active. That was very important for us, that we felt that the children were allowed to bring out their energy inside the home, or if possible outside the home in the garden. So this was a major thing for us. When there were periods that there was no curfew, then we went out. We gathered in the house of the parents of my mother-in-law, and so we went sometimes back to our house, which soldiers tried to open. They tried to open the door, and you saw the violence, and our kids saw the violence. They also saw our neighbor, who was a member of the Palestinian Authority, and kind of undersecretary for Muslim-Christian relations. And so his house was completely damaged and inside destroyed by the soldiers. And you had this strange combination of that we, because I was a foreigner, and so that's usually the soldiers were cautious not to have damaging the house inside. But our kids saw the neighbor, and they saw it from inside. They saw how paintings, even of the Last Supper, were taken down and damaged. So these type of things were traumatic for the kids. And I tried, during the time that it was possible, to play out with the kids, to bring out that feeling of energy and to avoid powerlessness. And so, for instance, we did in the garden that we played out what happened to our neighbors. And so my daughter was then the journalist. She played Al Jazeera. There were a couple of female journalists in Al Jazeera who were quite famous at the time. And so she did. She played it out, and so at least she could tell the world. That was the way how she dealt with the situation. When the soldiers came into the house where we stayed, then also my kid was initially a bit afraid, but because the soldiers were polite towards me as a foreigner, so our kids felt reassured. And you have these strange situations that a soldier or a commander is putting a hand on the kid and saying that don't be afraid. Well, there was all reason to be in a way to be afraid. So these are some of my memories at the time. You try with the kid to bring out tension at the time. Strangely enough, they try to go into the streets, but you have the home as a protective castle, and you have the dangerous outside, where potentially a tank could come and enter and sweep the streets free of children who were playing a jungle with all kind of animal sounds. So this is the strange feeling we always had, and even that translated itself into fantasy. You had the witch coming from outside, you had the wolf coming from outside, and inside you had the royal family. I played the prince. We played a wedding, and so we played how to fight, how to stand off against the wolf and the witches. So it translated into this borderline between a protective inside and a dangerous outside. We try to work on that all the time.
And I want to keep asking something about this period of time. So you have a chapter in the book called Housebound, where you describe being confined during the curfews, obviously not only the children, but also yourself and your wife. So I was wondering, how did these periods of intense restrictions affect your family, particularly yourself, your wife, in terms of time and space? And perhaps you can also reflect upon how your training as an anthropologist may have influenced your approach in documenting what was happening, but also experiencing your life as, with your freedom restricted, essentially jailed in your own home.
Yeah, my wife is very different from me, so she brings out her anger. Like she immediately, when soldiers enter to check the house, then she immediately challenges them. And in general, Palestinian women have a bit more space than Palestinian men to do this, also at checkpoints. So this was her way to bring out. I'm more by nature more a calm person. So for instance, I used to make notes for the diary and the blogs all the time, and so that is a kind of training, maybe also out of anthropology. Also, this issue of insider outsider, this is part of my personality. So we reacted in different ways, but you can say that the space shrunk very much, but in terms of the how we adapted to the time elements, I think we forgot more or less which day of the week it was, but you have like different types of rhythms of time. You have the rhythm of occupation, and that of course makes life unpredictable and disruptive. But at the same time, you have the rhythm of having children, of family life. You give them the milk to the baby. You play with the kids. You give them the bath. So that was the daily life rhythm at that time. But you also have the more let's say the rhythm of the cultural rhythm, the rhythm of Christmas or of a New Year. I have a very strong memory at the time when we had the 1st of January in 2003. So that happened that we were planning after Christmas on the 25th of December, which is of course a big occasion in Bethlehem. The whole December month is like cultural and seasonal. But we were planning to have on the 1st of January the baptism of Tamer, our son. And it happened that in the morning it was not clear whether there was a curfew or not on the 1st. And so there was, through the DCO, which is the liaison between the Israelis and the Palestinian authority at the time in Bethlehem, they announced that there was a lifting of the curfew, but there was a tank on the street which announced the curfew in Arabic from early morning on. So we were really not, baptism is like quite a festivity here. And so my wife was calling everybody that as soon as the curfew was lifted, that we would go to the church, that we arranged with the Franciscan, not the Franciscan priest and the Jesuit to do our the baptism. And so at the time, sometimes with weddings, it happened that people were inviting the guests to say, okay, we have at this hour, we want to do it at this hour, but if there's a curfew, then it will be like 1 hour later after the curfew is lifted, then we will have the wedding. So something like this happened too. But so I remember at that time that we had the baptism cake. I went to the bakery. As a foreigner, it was easier to arrange things. And so I went to the bakery with a big cake with the name of Tamer on top of the cake. And I walked along the street without knowing whether there was a curfew or not. And the tank which announced it was 100 meters behind me. So I just walked up to Nativity Square to the restaurant where we would have the baptism. So at the end, everybody came, while not really knowing whether there was a curfew or not, but everybody of the family came. And so this was felt like one of the little victories, which give a bit of self-confidence to people when you do these things. And so that was how we opened 2003 at the time. So the day after the long year with many curfews, so we opened the year without knowing whether there was a curfew or not in the new year.
I want to move to another chapter, which is about the wall. And you describe various creative responses to the separation barrier, which separates Palestine to Israel. And you also talk about the Wall Museum. So what role do you think art and creativity play in the resistance movement and as a resistance itself? And I just want to point out that actually, I remember personally, I think it was 2010, I was visiting Bethlehem, and it was during the World Cup. And to my surprise, I actually ended up watching a game that was literally projected on the wall. And so I thought that there was kind of a interesting and hilarious at the same time, but also the relationship between some Israeli guards, the kind of dialogue. I mean, it felt a little bit surreal, but I thought it was like a very interesting dynamic that was taking place in that specific moment.
Yeah, I was involved with my organization, Arab Educational Institute, into organizing activities at schools, also at homes, but also at the wall, especially in North Bethlehem, where the wall surrounds the religious site Rachel's tomb. So it used to be, Rachel's tomb used to be along the road going from Jerusalem to the Church of Nativity. You passed it by. It was a rather small site, a small cupola. But it became like a military bastion with two walls surrounding it, and you couldn't and still cannot enter it out of Bethlehem. You had to go to have a permission to go to Jerusalem, and then even then it is for Bethlehemites not really possible to go into the pilgrim's bus and then to go from Jerusalem to Rachel's tomb. So it is now surrounded by this 8-9 meter high wall. The wall has been full of graffiti by foreigners, by Palestinians. In the beginning, Palestinians, when they did graffiti, they were arrested. They could really stay for a while into prison when they were active through graffiti making. Later on, that kind of the wall was kind of normalized, and people, they did activities next to the wall, and our organization saw it as a form of protest, but also to show life that you prevented that the wall claimed the life along the wall. You wanted to make a statement of life vis-a-vis the wall. And so that was like, you can say, a kind of sumud protest, showing that life continued despite the wall. And so we organized a women's choir, making making songs, even related to Bethlehem and to the Bible, songs about the Virgin Mary, which is also the Mary is Miriam important in the Quran, and so there is in the New Testament like a story about a song about the Virgin Mary speaking up against the throne, and we reenacted that story, in which then Palestinian women sang vis-a-vis the military tower which was in front of them. Of course, you had the using of the wall as a screen, about which you talk, as a kind of theater. We made it into, and at one point we also developed what we called the Wall Museum, and the Wall Museum is like strong weather-resistant posters on the wall of 2 meter by 1 meter, quite very large. So they were of thin metal, and they showed stories of Palestinian life in a daily life, in a way that it's accessible language. Most of them in English, some of them in Arabic, and so it was about also life of youth, life of women that we put on the wall. And we made over time. We started in 2010 when you visited Bethlehem, and it was over more than 10 years that we developed this wall museum around Tomb and around the checkpoint. And we were not quite sure whether the army allowed it. I remember that it happened that the army came in the night, and that one soldier was reading the text in English, then another soldier was reading them or translating them into Hebrew, and the third one was putting them on an audio recorder. So there was like a registration, a documentation of the Wall Museum, one by one. So one member of our groups at the institute, she stayed up for hours because she was listening to the soldiers reading all these posters. So that was a major kind of nonviolent resistance, you can say, community resistance, because we at the institute we collected all these stories from our women's and youth groups, and so we collected them in Arabic. Then most of them we translated into English, and we abbreviated them so that these were like summaries. So it was a kind of active oral history as nonviolent resistance.
Now, we talked about the wall, and I think it's important that we talk also about the checkpoints, which are connected with the wall. Your descriptions of checkpoint experiences are particularly vivid. Could you talk about how the Med permit game, as you call it, affects Palestinians psychologically beyond just the physical restrictions?
Yeah, psychologically, you have the issue that basically the checkpoints and the permits you need to pass the checkpoint, that it dominates Palestinian life now more than ever. By the way, since the October 23. So it really dominates life. It makes it unpredictable. You have to sometimes strategize. You're traveling from Bethlehem to Ramallah or to Hebron. You have to check out with taxi drivers to know how the distances are. But yes, the checkpoint, you know, in let's say in the 90s, it was with the checkpoint still somehow possible. For instance, when you had young kids, then to talk yourself through a checkpoint. This after the building of the wall in 2004-5, it was not really anymore possible, and the checkpoints became kind of industrialized. Even it was even as if you go from one country to another country. If you look at checkpoint 300 between Bethlehem and Jerusalem. So when people went to the checkpoint, they had to pass by an X-ray. They had to pass by the passport control. They had to pass by an initial surveillance point. So you went from one point to another point, and you were a little bit lost. I remember the first time that I went there with our daughter. You were lost. You had the feeling. So where do you have to go from one place to another place? This feeling that you're out of your familiar environment. That was another psychological aspect. You were suddenly like as if you were in a different world. So next to the unpredictability, you had this feeling of unfamiliarity in an unknown territory. But overall, I think the unpredictability element is dominating. You cannot. My wife used to say, you cannot, predict you cannot plan your daily life. You cannot plan your tomorrow. You cannot plan the future of your kids. So this is a major reason psychologically that many people, if they have the chance, if they have family abroad, that they would like to emigrate, would like to get out of this situation. Psychologically, it's also the humiliation you experience My wife, she used to say it is so sad that you are happy to get a permit to travel in your own country. So this is eating people's psyche. That people have to go for a permit, and in the past, I would speak about 10, 20 years ago, people were common to go to a settlement in order to get a permit, and there you don't have like that you get numbers and that you are queuing. No, you are just simply waiting upon your turn. Only when there were like Israeli human rights activists, like Mahzoum Watch, for instance, these are Israeli women to go and to see how things happened at such places. So then suddenly they started to give numbers and people started queuing, and as soon as they left, then the numbers were withdrawn, taken back. Which is all this element of unpredictability and humiliation. It's this combination which makes people, very angry, and some people who let's say have a protective inner layer in their psyche, so they manage to stay calm. So you have people who manage to stay calm, and people who become very angry and try to find their ways to get that out.
Yes, stay calm is something that it's not easy in those situations, and I guess it's a gift to many. I want to move away from checkpoints and the war because throughout the book you describe several hikes through places like Batir, Kremison, and you noted that the landscape itself holds a specific meaning. So I was wondering if you can reflect upon that. What does it mean that the landscape itself holds a meaning? And also, how has your relationship with the Palestinian landscape, which has changed throughout time, evolved over the last few decades?
Yeah, it is. In the past, when our kids were young, in the second half of the 1990s, at that time, you had sometimes a landscape in which you didn't feel that there were borders. Of course, now we have like the wall, we have the checkpoints, settlements, all are expressing borders in the Palestinian landscape. So, and sometimes you don't know exactly where there's the border. But the time that we established ourselves, my wife and I, in Palestine in 95 and the years after that, it was, for instance, I went with my kids going out from the garden to the surroundings. And even though we were living in the heart of Bethlehem, you walked and suddenly you were in a no man's land, and suddenly you were on top of a shed of our neighbor. And then when we went down, we were, the neighbors were surprised, but they said, "No, welcome, come and eat with us. Eat cookies, the seasonal cookies, kaak en mamul, which happened, it was Christmas time." So this gave this walks like a little bit like a feeling of adventure. Now later on, you had this chance to go into the landscape, and you have here beautiful wadis. In the desert, it is 20 minutes by car, and you are in the desert. So you had the possibility of walking in the wadis for hours, and you had to be careful about the water, of course. You had to be careful about snakes, insects, and all this. But it gave a connection to the beauty of the land, and so this you had this strange experience of timelessness. In Wadi Khartoum, to the east of Bethlehem, not so far from the river Jordan. So you saw places where thousands of years ago the fire was supposedly invented. You had archaeological remnants of 2,000 years ago of old monasteries, desert monasteries, where the desert fathers used to live in the Byzantine times. So this feeling of timelessness, but then you suddenly saw on top of the hill the settlements arising, so which gave you a very more, let's say, the political time rhythm came back. So this is what I felt very much, that you jumped in a time machine from one time level to another time level. Me as coming from Holland, used to live in an area where you have fences between the gardens and so on, and that is something which you in the Palestinian culture you don't have. In the Israeli occupational culture, you have that very much, this feeling of borderlines.
Now we have time for a few more questions, and I want to tackle a few general issues. So in the book, you write eloquently about Muslim-Christian relations in Palestine. And I was wondering, what misconceptions do Western readers typically have about religious coexistence in the region? And I must point out that recently, with the appointment of Mike Huckabee as the new American ambassador to Israel, actually that may have changed to another direction. Mike Huckabee, for instance, has a very poor opinion of local Christians. So I wonder, what are the general misconceptions here?
Yeah, the most basic misconception is that people don't know that there are Palestinian Christians. That is one thing. I know that from my own family. My daughter had to argue with some of my, cousins about the very existence of Palestinian Christians, or when it is acknowledged that there are Christians, that they are supposedly have been converted in a few generations ago, and not realizing that Palestinian Christianity is the oldest in town. That you have the Greek Orthodox Christian, the Syriac Christians, who even in their liturgy speak Aramaic from the time of Jesus. So that is very basic. But I think a major also misconception is that people see that when you have a Christian or a Muslim majority society, that then Palestinian Christians are doomed, in a way, doomed to disappear. To some extent, what happened in Iraq and Syria, that many Christians emigrated because, of course, the Daesh, the political situation and the military situation of some of these extremist groups there, who made it very difficult to stay. By the way, in between brackets, for many Palestinian Christians, it's very difficult to see how the head of Syria at the moment, who used to be a devoted Al-Qaeda member, suddenly is now accepted and endorsed by the West, and now by Trump. So this, but that is like a sideline. But in general, you can say there has been not so much coexistence, but a living together of Palestinian Christians and Muslims. There's a tradition. You cannot say that there's without any problems. When there are problems between families, for instance, then about a piece of land or about a border on the land, then it may happen that Islam and Christianity, that it's as a layer over these differences, that it can get an extra accent. So that happens. But in general, you can say that there has been an age-long living together between Muslims and Christians. My kids were also at schools in which they were in class with Muslim students and Christian students, and so during religious lessons they tended to separate, but on all the other lessons they were together, and they had Muslim and Christian friends. So that I think is really a misconception, that there are like two blocks who somehow need to learn to live together. No, that's historically, this living together is part of the culture. So this, I think, are a few misconceptions. That doesn't mean like my organization, the Institute, Arab Education Institute, they used to work also to inform Muslim students in Hebron, for instance, where you don't have Christians, so about Christian life. And we also had excursions arranged in which Muslims learned about Christian sites, and Christians learned about Muslim sites. So in itself, some work had to be done, but you built upon something, upon an age-long living together which existed already there.
Now, in the afterword, you address the devastating events in Gaza since October 2023. And I was wondering how has writing this book during such a critical moment affected your perspective on sumud and resistance?
Yeah, that was very clear, in the last 2 years. That's really that really sumud was something important for Gazans to stay in the country, in Palestine, even though as the majority of Palestinians are refugees, and so, but still, sumud was also a symbol for the Gazans, like in the West Bank and even in the Galilee and Israel proper. So, but the more people were uprooted and were forced to go from one area to another area in Gaza, they were manipulated all the time. Now we are in a situation of almost like extermination, of genocide. So this is, of course, you cannot stay sumud, you cannot keep your sumud in a situation in which the best you can is to survive. So to say now, look, the Palestinians in Gaza are samadin, that is not relevant. They have to survive. If you look into the heart of Palestinians, many of them, and certainly in Gaza now, they want to leave, and they should have the right to leave in order to survive as a family or as a community. So this is you can say that the fact that they are staying there is a reluctant form of sumud, inadvertent. They shouldn't be able to stay there. They simply would have the chance to leave if they want. And so this is a major contradiction in sumud.
A couple of more questions, and one is about the story. So you have incorporated many personal accounts and stories from Palestinians throughout the book. And I was wondering if there's one that stood out and you want to share with us.
The one story was when our daughter was 9 years old, and she was together with my wife at the checkpoint 300 between Bethlehem and Jerusalem. And now our daughter is treated as a Dutch when she is with me, usually, but treated as a Palestinian when she is with my wife. And it happened at that time that in 2007, I think it was, that she she stayed beeping in the X-ray. So she was not allowed to enter, and the soldier said, "Take off your clothes," just like that, and in public. And my wife became very, very angry. She said, "Why don't you allow us to do that in a private room?" There were people also behind her who were all able to see that. So this she told my daughter, "Don't do that." And my daughter also started crying at the time. Then the soldier said, "You go back to Bethlehem," and my wife said, "Go back to Tel Aviv." So it was a standoff, simply. Nowadays, when that would happen at the checkpoint, they would simply close the checkpoint. But my wife was so angry that she stayed there for 20 minutes, and the soldier didn't allow them to enter, and also didn't allow others to enter into the checkpoint. So it was in a bit tragic-comic, I think, situation. Still, some people, they remember, who were in the queue. They told me later on what happened there. And but of course they didn't tell my wife to leave. At the end, she had to leave, and with my daughter she went through another checkpoint. You have another one in Bejala, down towards Jerusalem, and so she was able to talk her way there, where you don't have the wall. So this was something which, always kept in mind, and my daughter also see that as was in a way like a moment of politicization for my daughter, who also later on she became a designer, and she made like an animation cartoon together with others about how to fly all across the wall, how to with use of fantasy. So in a way, we felt that she was also affected by this story. I can tell about many checkpoint stories. One more story, if you allow. In Al Arub camp north of Bethlehem, it happened that one member of the Arab Educational Institute, he was a headmaster of an UNRWA school, a UN school, and he had to leave the camp during the second Intifada. It was that he had to show his passport or his ID at the entrance of the camp towards a military tower. So he had to show it upwards to a window where he didn't know whether there was a soldier or not. So sometimes it happened that he waited for 10 minutes just showing his ID to the military tower before he took the bold decision to go and leave the camp and pass the tower, which is incredibly humiliating to be objectified in this way, especially when you do that every morning. So I think this is also, people look at the wall as a concrete sign of kind of humiliation, but these pyramids and showing the checkpoints, showing your ID at checkpoints, it is very, very difficult to absorb. He was also, by the way, also a very calm person, and he kept his diary also, and I think that was one way to get rid of his emotions.
I must admit to admire your positivity, as the book ends with some reflections on hope. After all you've witnessed, what gives you hope for the future of Palestine?
Well, I cannot say nowadays with what happens in Gaza that there is much reason to be optimistic, and you have a difference between optimism and hope. Optimism is more kind of that you predict things on the basis of a realistic analysis. Hope is coming more out of the soul, out of the depths of people's psyche, you can say. And I think hope is inevitable in order to keep on living. Like sometimes it is said here, despair is a luxury. You have to continue life, and you have to find your sources of hope. And I feel that the simple sources of hope, whether it is the smile of a child or a baby, or simply the rhythms of life, hearing in the morning, the shout at the kayak, the bread is there, the warm bread. These things, little things, they give hope, they give a rhythm to life. And I believe that these are like the little things, sources of sumud, of hope, without which people cannot live. So I feel very strongly nowadays this distinction between hope and optimism.
This was Toine van Teeffelen, author of The Birthplace of Jesus Is in Palestine, a memoir, published in 2024. Toine, thank you so much.
Thank you, Roberto.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support the podcast, please share it with others on social media or leave a rating and review. To catch all the latest, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook @Jerusalem Unplugged. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.